Trudy Morgan Cole, and I'm starting a little Christmas project of reading scenes from some of my historical novels that are set at Christmas time. And I've decided to start with By the Rivers of Brooklyn. This scene is set in Brooklyn, New York, in December 1928. And if you haven't read this book or haven't read it for a while, it's about a Newfoundland family that most of them end up living and working in New York. And the main character in this chapter is Ethel. Ethel is married to Jim Evans. She used to be engaged to Jim's brother Bert until he died tragically. She married Jim instead. Ethel and Jim have been married a few years now and have a small son named Ralphie. And the other major character in this scene is Jim's younger brother Harold, who, following the rest of his siblings, has just recently moved to New York for work and is living with Ethel and Jim. On Christmas Eve, Ethel, Jim, and Harold put up their Christmas tree. It was the first Christmas tree Ethel had had since coming to New York, and she thought she'd cry to see it there in their living room, all done with popcorn strings and sugar cookies. Harold and Jim had come home early from work, dragging the tree and carrying a box with a red and silver tin star in it. Jim stuck his head in the door and told Ethel, who was in a frenzy of scrubbing and cleaning while trying to keep Ralphie out from underfoot, to come outside for a minute. "I don't want Ralphie to see," he said. "We got it from the guy selling them on the corner. Me and Harold figured we'd put it up tonight, after Ralphie goes to bed." Ethel stood on the front step of the apartment building, staring at the small evergreen, and at Harold, who was holding it up. The tree was not quite as tall as Harold. She didn't know what to say. Having their own tree had never occurred to her. She pictured Ralphie's eyes glowing when he woke in the morning to see it. "Where are you going to put it till tonight?" she said. "Somebody'll take it for sure if you leave it out there." "We'll find some place to stick it," Harold said. "We got this star to put on top, but we'll need some other stuff to decorate it with." We've got popcorn. I can make that and string it, and maybe some cookies," Ethel said, thinking of all the work she had to do already. They were having Jean and Robert and their youngsters for Christmas dinner, as well as Rose and her young man, if they actually showed up. Why hadn't she or Jim thought of a tree? This was Harold, she knew without being told. Only Harold could make such a leap. Harold brought laughter into the house. He told jokes, ones a lady didn't need to be ashamed to laugh at, and he played with Ralphie by the hour. Jim was good with Ralphie too, of course. Both men liked to come home in the evenings and wrestle on the floor with Ralphie, tickle and chase him and play fight. It sounded so lively and fun with the three of them out there in the living room while Ethel cooked supper. All those male voices, all that energy. And Harold was so kind and thoughtful too, the way Bert used to be. He would carry his own dishes in from the table to the kitchen, and sometimes even pick up a towel to dry for her while she was washing. And while he dried the odd dish or stood in the kitchen, he talked to her. That was it, really. He talked to her. Jim would come home at the end of the day and give her a kiss on the cheek and say, "How was your day?" But she knew that if she said anything more than "Fine, dear," he would stop listening. He wanted peace and quiet at the end of a long day. He might play with Ralphie, but he didn't want to be badgered with questions or news. Harold. Now he would come into the kitchen after supper when she was washing up and say, "You'll never guess what we saw coming home from work on the subway today, Ethel. You would have laughed if you'd been there. There was a woman, dark-skinned, kind of a foreign-looking woman, and you know what she had? She had a dog in her purse. In her purse! I said to Jim, didn't I, Jim? My, I wish Ralphie was here. He got some laugh seeing that. Imagine a dog so small it could fit in her purse. You ever see a dog that small, Ethel?" And Ethel would say, "No, I never did. I saw a woman walking a dog the other day with a sweater on, though. Can you imagine the like, knitting a sweater for a dog? I wonder where you'd even get the pattern." And Harold would laugh, and they'd share that moment, laughing at New York people and their foolish dogs and their strange ways. It wasn't much, perhaps, but Harold had made a great difference to the house. He'd been sleeping on their couch now for 5 months, and 2 or 3 times he'd made some noise about finding himself a boarding house. But Jim and Ethel both said nonsense, they wouldn't hear of it. Of course they would have said the same to any relative. It would be a shame to have a member of the family off living in some boarding house when they had room to spare. But even Jim said that Harold was great to have around. It was like he made the apartment warmer or brighter or something. As Ethel finished stringing each long strand of popcorn, she handed it to the boys and they twisted it round and round the little tree. Harold had poked holes in the cookies. They were shaped like stars and Christmas trees. and stuck little bits of thread through them, which he was clumsily trying to make hangers. He and Jim got foolish again while they decorated and started eating the bits of popcorn that fell off and then tossing them into each other's mouths and standing farther and farther back to see how far they could catch it from. And Ethel, who usually didn't have much patience with shenanigans, laughed right along with them. Suddenly they heard the door to the hall open, and there in his pajamas stood Ralphie, wide-eyed. Ethel saw the surprise and delight in his eyes and the big grin on Jim's face seeing him there. All she could think was that this was supposed to have happened in the morning, when the tree was all done and the presents underneath it. Here it was, 11:30 at night, and the tree half done, and the star not even on it. Now he was awake and might have a hard time getting back to sleep, and Christmas morning was all spoiled. "Look what you've done now! I told you you'd wake up Ralphie if you didn't stop carrying on," she snapped. "Ralphie, you shouldn't be out of your bed this hour of night." Ralphie stood still, as if he didn't hear her at all, staring at the tree as if he couldn't imagine how it had grown there so fast. Ethel was just getting ready to raise her voice and order him back to bed when Harold crossed the floor in 2 steps and scooped up Ralphie, just in time, before she told him he had to go to bed, and carried him across the room and put him in Jim's arms. "Look, Bye, it's our very own Christmas tree," Harold said. "St. Nicholas brought it," Jim said, happy again with his little boy snuggled in his arms. "Christmas now," Ralphie said. He darted a glance at his mother to see if it was safe to smile, and Ethel smiled at him. How could she not have seen that this was right, that he was supposed to come out and find them and the tree all like this at almost midnight? She hadn't seen that, but Harold had, of course, just like he'd known they needed the tree. 24 hours later, the 3 of them were in the kitchen, the 2 men sitting down at the table while Ethel finished up the last of the dishes. Rose and her young man Tony had gone off not long after dinner, but Jean and Robert and their crowd had stayed for supper, and so there was a huge pile of dishes. It had been a grand day, though. They were all tired out now, but Harold seemed to understand Ethel's need to make it all live again, to bring out the bright moments of the day like pieces of the best silver, polished and catching the light. Ralphie was some pleased with his stocking, wasn't he? Thought he'd died and gone to heaven when he got those chocolate bars. Yes, and when he saw the toy soldiers, Ethel said. Sure, him and David were playing with them the whole afternoon. I had toy soldiers like that when I was a boy, Jim put in. Remember them, Harold? Yes, boy, but you and Bert played with them so much by the time I got them, there was only half of them left, and most of them had legs or arms cracked off. I used to line them off and pretend the battle was over and they was all in the field hospital with their limbs blown off. Jim laughed so hard Ethel thought he'd bust a gut. All you needed was a little Florence Nightingale, he said, wiping tears from his eyes. Should have fixed one of them up with a little headpiece for you. All 3 of them laughed, and Jim sighed. It's hard lines for the youngest, always getting the leftovers of everything, he said. Ralphie's lucky, just like I was. First one gets all the new clothes and all the new toys. Harold shook his head. Not many toys when we were growing up, though. Ralphie'll do better. Thanks for listening. I'll be back with another one tomorrow, and Merry Christmas.